What was worth getting up and excited for at WWDC22?
And has the EU's USB-C ruling doomed the world to a lack of cable innovation? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back once again to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, joined as always by Adam Turner. Hey Adam, well, a lot of the focus, let's face it, nearly all of the focus this week was on Apple. Samsung tried to grab some attention by showing off a 200 megapixel phone camera sensor. And they did this by taking a cat photo and blowing it up to the size of a basketball court and sticking that to the side of a building in South Korea. They really did do this. The internet's built on cat photos, of course, we're not going to deny that. But can you think of a practical use that you'd put a 200 megapixel smartphone sensor to?
200 megapixels is a lot of megapixels to play with. I think that what we need is an extreme close-up of Donald Trump's hair so we can settle a few questions once and for all.
That's not so much a picture, sir, as a horror show, I think.
True.
This week, we're also welcoming Jen Dudley-Nicholson from News Corp back into the virtual Vertical Hold studios. Jen, I know you're a lady who loves a camera, loves a big sensor. What would be your go-to shot?
Well, at the moment, I think I would have really have liked to have taken a 200 megapixel photo of just the blues crowd last night at the State of Origin. And then I could just individually pick out each little face and see them cry. I think that would be amazing.
We'll explain it to you later, Alex.
Blues. Jake and Elwood, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Brothers.
So the big news this week basically all emerged from the very wee hours of Tuesday morning. Oh, I'm still tired. At Apple's WWDC 2022 keynote. And we will be diving into everything M2, macOS Ventura, iPadOS, and all the rest directly. But this wasn't the only area where Apple was in the spotlight. After talking about it for years and years and years, I can genuinely recall writing a story that leads directly into it more than a decade ago. The EU this week decided once and for all that it really loves USB-C, making it a mandatory standard for small gadgets sold in the European trading bloc from 2024. Jen, why does the EU care about how we plug in phones, tablets, and portable game consoles?
I think the EU has done a lot for, how we use technology, especially around privacy. And around this particular issue, they seem to be really full on. And I mean, it has to do with competition, I suppose, but also creating a level playing field for everybody. And I kind of like the idea of one cord to rule them all. So, as a person with two boxes of proprietary cables sitting behind me right now, USB-C sounds pretty good.
Yeah, they're also pitching it, I think, as an environmental idea that you don't end up with wasted charges because if everything's USB-C, then every charger works with everything. I think they've also talked a little bit about standardizing so that some of your funkier fast power charging standards, the VOOC stuff that Oppo does and things like that, would have to work with other gadgets as well. So a full-on standardization thing. Adam, do you think are there downsides to this kind of thing?
Well, the question I have there is that really you're not talking about power adapters. You're talking about cables. Because think about it, practically every device these days of the gadgets that we're talking about, the AC adapter that plugs into the wall socket and the cable that runs from the adapter to your gadget are two separate things. So really there's nothing that's if you switch from, iPhone to Android, you don't have to go and buy a new 5-volt adapter that plugs into the wall. What you need to do is go and buy yourself a USB to USB-C cable, or the other way around. You need to get yourself a USB to lightning cable. So I don't know how much of an argument there is there about e-waste when really those AC chargers should be compatible with anything.
But the cables themselves are e-waste too. I mean, they've got plastic and various kind of funky chemicals. The big company, of course, that didn't like this all the way through, presumably still doesn't, is Apple, because they're the standouts in this space because of Lightning and the argument that's been posed there. And I have seen some people saying this since the EU made their effectively sort of final data determination this week, was that it would stifle innovation. Jen, do you buy the stifling innovation argument?
Look, I mean, it's an interesting sort of point to make. I think that we haven't seen a lot of innovation in lightning chargers for a long period of time. And I think that's where the argument generally falls down. Apple's kind of having an each way bet at the moment because they do support USB C in a lot of things, including my favorite iPads. In fact, I think they've kind of gone down throughout the iPad range now, USB C rather than Lightning. And yet we still have these weird sort of contradictions where, you'll get an amazing keyboard to put with your iPad that takes USB-C, and it will have to be charged by Lightning. So it would make things so much easier. In terms of innovation, come up with a better system to do USB-C for sure, that also supports the other ones as well, and you'll get everybody on board.
But there won't be innovation. I mean, to me, the question is why here and why now? If the European Union had finalized this decision 10 years ago, would we be stuck with mini USB or micro USB? Nobody would want that. So who's to say that USB-C is the be all and end all, and this is where we should draw the line?
I think they've been trying to do this for a long period of time. I think this is, I mean, Alex has said he's written about it a lot. They've been trying to standardize chargers across mobile phones for the longest period. USB-C is currently sort of the best model that we have to work with.
That's my point. Currently, but 10 years ago,
nothing to
it would have been
this
something else.
There's nothing to stop this being upgraded in future. I mean,
But
we're
how will they
talking about
upgrade it? Because no
essential.
one will develop a new format. Because why would you bother? Because you can't use it. Because everybody has to use USB-C. It's the whole chicken and egg thing.
Are you coming out in favor of proprietary chargers?
No,
Because that is
I'm
a
not coming
bold
out in
move, sir.
favor. I'm doing the whole devil's advocate here. I'm taking a leaf out of Alex's book. But my point, not so much that I'm coming out in charge of proprietary, but once you draw that line in the sand, who's to say that now is the time to draw it in the sand?
Well, I think there's two things to point out here. It's not entirely fair to say that Apple hasn't innovated with Lightning, because the Lightning we have now is slightly different to the Lightning that we originally got with the first Lightning devices. It's USB 3, it's slightly faster. Electrically, it's just a little bit different. So there is some space to do stuff. And I would say, at least within USB-C, that is a slightly physically larger plug, which logically speaking, I'm not an electrical engineer, admittedly, should give you more space to maybe do those things for both a charging and a data standard. And they've also got to balance that against wireless. I mean, this is the other persistent Apple rumor, that Apple will develop a portless iPhone with, all your data just flinging around via iCloud and power just via Qi.
That would be the ultimate, I'm not going to do what you told me kind of thing to the EU, wouldn't it? You made me use this charger. Sure. Well, I'm going to get rid of all chargers. See how you like them apples. It'll be an interesting one, though. I reckon the people who are angry about the 30-pin port going from Apple are going to be the same people who are angry about wireless.
Yeah, well, Apple was totally happy to say, look, you can just change and do this, and sorry, 30-pin dock's gone.
Yeah.
So they're not exactly blameless here. But I guess the other thing is, as I said, I've been writing this story for years and years and years in various iterations. And for a long while, I kind of thought, well, yeah, if the EU does this, then Apple will have to follow suit and all devices will go that way. I don't know that that's 100% true anymore, though, because if you look at what Apple did with 5G in the iPhone last year, and we talked about this in the show when it came out, there's a ludicrous number of different individual chipsets and different frequency supports and different things for different models of the iPhone. If you buy it in the US, in Canada or Japan, in China, here in Australia, there's a whole bunch of different variants of that phone where you used to think, right, well, there's like maybe two because China's always had its own. So it's always possible that Apple could just go, right, well, we will either do what they did back in 2012 when they wanted standardization by shipping an adapter in a box, or we'll just go, okay, the EU gets a USB-C one, but everyone else is still on Lightning.
That would feel even worse than the wireless iPhone, to be honest. Like another adapter in my life, I do not need.
But we wouldn't get the adapter. The Europeans would. I mean, this is genuinely what they did. And this was back, in fact, Adam, in kind of micro USB days. This is genuinely what Apple started doing. They started providing an adapter. This was 30-pin to to macOS. Memory
Yeah.
serves, it's more than 10 years ago. I'm amazed I can remember it at all. But they did it to meet the letter of the law while still flicking the V's at the EU in effect. They
I,
could do the same again.
they could, but I think that there's more of a structural difference between switching out the different 5G chips in a phone and having two models of the handset, one with USB-C and one with Lightning. Again, I'm not an electrical engineer, but I would imagine that would be a much bigger challenge in the design and manufacturing stage than just switching out different 5G chips.
I suppose only Apple and its engineers know for sure. I'm sure they will.
And the people who do the dodgy knockoffs.
Well, yeah, for sure.
The guy at the
For
back
sure.
of the Foxconn factory at the back door that'll let you sneak in on a Saturday night.
We've already seen there were reports a little while ago of a guy who had actually forced USB-C onto an iPhone. Broke one open and did all the relevant wiring nonsense and so on. So it's certainly technically possible. But yeah, I guess we will have to wait and see. They've got till 2024, so that's a couple of iPhone models away before it's really going to hit home. And there has been that other long-running rumor that they were just going to go to USB-C anyway. So maybe we'll just get Tim Cook appearing this September saying, and by the way, we've adopted this magical new standard called USB-C.
So, Jen, if they did decide to go the wireless only model, how do you think that would go down with punters?
I think it would be very easy for me to write stories about it because I think there would be
Yeah, it'd be great
massive
for us.
outrage.
Yeah.
So personally, it would work really well. I think that would be a big change for people. I think that a lot of people are used to, sticking sticking a cord into their phone rather than sticking their phone on a platform. Absolutely, wireless charging has been around for a while. It's quite standardized. It's easy to do. Sometimes though, it's quite a bit slower depending on what model you have. So I think that there would necessarily be some outrage. And also, there's bound to be people who don't quite place their iPhones correctly on the charger. I mean, it's less of a problem when it comes to MagSafe charging, but overnight, if you have just a generalized wireless charger beside your bed, then absolutely things can go wrong. And I think we'd spend at least 2 weeks talking about the nightmares of, not quite placing things correctly. And then all of the accusations that, Apple were trying to get you to buy more stuff,
Well, more
which,
iCloud storage for a start.
well, for sure. um, so, yeah, I think that it's a tricky move for them to pull off. But at the same time, we're talking about the company who took away the headphone jack, recently brought it back to some of their
Shakes
Macs,
fist at cloud.
but basically almost ended headphones as we know it. And so, absolutely, if someone's going to do it, it's probably going to be Apple.
Well, speaking of Apple knows best, the other big topic this week was, of course, WWDC. A very, very early morning for a certain number of Australian tech journalists. Adam, of course, slept in, and I hate him. We kind of discussed some of the rumours last week, but they actually had a lot of detail, some of which we did suspect was coming. Jen, tell me about the M2 chip. Why are they calling it the M2 and what's special about it?
So they're calling it the M2 because it's not the M1 that came out last year. And so my understanding is that this one replaces the chip inside the MacBook Air, which is strangely enough Apple's most popular selling laptop, as I understand it. And so this one is a generation up. So we've skipped an entire generation. However, and I found this really interesting, it's not equivalent to an M1 Max. And so the M2, on the face of it, you would think, oh, okay, that is M2 is probably
It's better than
twice as
M1.
good
Yeah.
than an M1, which came out a minute ago. But no, so we've had talks about Apple naming strategy before, and the M1 Max, the maximum of M1, is better than the M2.
Isn't that the M1 Ultra?
What?
And but I was getting
The
at this.
M1 Uber?
Yeah, I was getting at this last week. M2 is such a weird name because consumers are going to get confused. They're going to think this is the best I can get right now. And it isn't, although I did find it interesting. Apple really won't say by how much or what the difference is. They talked up a lot about M1 versus M2. And for the record, I think if you've got an M1 machine, keep it. You'd be mad to upgrade. This is just one of those spec bump upgrades in terms of speed.
Yeah.
It's faster, yes, but it's not going to be enough for a new machine. But they didn't really say how it compares to those Max Pro or Ultra chips, apart from just vaguely saying, oh, look, they are still faster by some nebulous quantity.
Yeah, so it's really hard to put benchmarks against all of these things. But I think the thing that consumers need to be aware of is that the M2 is the new version of the M1, whereas the M1 Pro and Max are kind of separate entities. And so they're very different customers who be buying these things in the same way that a MacBook Air owner is different to a MacBook Pro owner.
Unless
So-
you're buying the M1 MacBook Air that they're still selling.
Or the
Just to confuse people.
M2 MacBook Pro that comes out shortly. Yes.
Are we assuming that there will be an M2 Pro, Max, and Ultra?
Yes. That is absolutely what I'm assuming, but it won't be for some time because it wasn't that long ago that we actually saw the Pro and the fancy versions of the M1 come out. And we haven't actually got, I thought this was interesting, we haven't got a firm date, as I understand it, for the MacBook Air, like the new version. So it actually said on the website after the event, we will announce its launch date. It'll be a month away. And normally we get a firm date on these things. So maybe that's a little bit of chip shortage sneaking in there. Not sure. Feels like it.
We are not a supply chain
Drink.
podcast. It's one of my firm rules, Adam. You know that.
I'm
But you're
working
not
on it.
wrong. They just said next month. But I did find it interesting getting back to it that they're keeping their cheapest MacBook Air is the lowest end M1. I think it's 7-core CPU, 8-core GPU, off the top of my head, which is $14.99. And it's funny because I actually, for that MacBook Air market, for the ones that want the portability and the battery life, that might be the model, even not having tested the M2 MacBook Air, that might be the model to buy if you don't need to do, video rendering or higher end stuff, just because it's affordable. And that's also got to play into why it's Apple's best selling laptop, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's basically the price of a phone. And depending on the phone, like phones could be more expensive than that model. So, absolutely. I think it ends up being a good sort of entry level model for kids as well. I mean, lucky kids, admittedly. But kids in high school who need something to put in their bag and carry around. And it's small enough that you could put enough cases on it that it might actually protect the darn thing.
Yeah, but you'll get a lot more bang for your buck from a PC notebook, though, in the student market.
It depends on the school as well, and it depends on the demands of the school. Absolutely.
That is true. Now, there were a lot of rumors doing the rounds that they were going to go super colorful in the way that they have with the iMac. We didn't quite get that, but we did get some interesting colors to pick from, only for the MacBook Air, but not the Pro 13.
Which is pretty usual. Apparently, if you go pro, you have to be boring and businesslike and show up in your grey suit. Two variations of grey suit, admittedly, but yeah, we thought we were going to get for the MacBook Air. Maybe I saw different leaks about a green version. I think it's just random people making this up in their basements, and more power to them. But we did get a midnight blue version, which is very attractive. I mean, I think that you'd probably take a second look at it to work out that it was blue and not, black, like in a bad clothing shop or something. And we got Starlight as well, which is kind of a gold color. If you're not aware of what color Starlight is, because why would you be?
So there isn't a black one. The black one that I thought was the black one is the midnight blue one.
It is. In the wrong kind of light, it might be black, but it's midnight blue. We haven't seen Carrie Bradshaw's MacBook come back just yet.
Now, there was a time when Apple released the black MacBook, or MacBook Pro, I think it was, and you were basically paying another $200 for black paint. Now, I would like to make fun of those people, except I was one, because I just wanted one so bad. And I was ashamed of myself, but I still bought one.
Everyone may now point at Adam and laugh.
Yes. Are we paying $200 for blue paint here?
I don't believe so. I don't believe it costs any extra. So I'm very apologetic for your experience, and I understand. I have a vague memory that at one point when the iPhone came out in piano black, that was also a big deal, and people were
The
very
glossy
excited.
one was, yeah.
About getting the glossy version. I mean, this is honestly like if you were buying one for my money and that you weren't choosing midnight blue, then why not? Because it does maybe date it as a certain period of time where that's what Apple released, but it does look very attractive and it doesn't cost any extra.
That we know of. They could do what, from memory, they did with that glossy model, which was that technically, I I don't recall, I could be wrong, but technically I don't think it cost more. They just only sold it in the higher storage capacities, so you had to
Oh,
spend more. And to be fair to Apple, this is actually a trick that Microsoft pulls with some of its Surface models as well. There's certain configurations you can only get in certain colors. We don't know because we can't order them just yet, but it looks like they're all the same price and the same color. Speaking of things that are back, MagSafe is back as well, which means this thing's got more ports because the model it's sort of replacing just has the two Thunderbolt ports. This has two Thunderbolt and MagSafe, and you can charge from any of them. In fact,
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice addition. I don't think it's going to change the world or anything, but I mean, it's nice to be able to have access to the actual two ports that you've got on the machine while you're also charging it. I mean, one of the nice things about this machine though is that its battery, as a result of the chip and the changes that Apple has made to that chip, it goes for a long time between charges. But just yeah, being able to access all of the bits you paid for, nice addition.
and a headphone jack and a 1080p camera. They're finally getting with it for webcams, which is something where I thought Apple has really dragged its feet on laptops for such a long time for such a premium brand.
I think they do cop a bit of heat though when it comes to actually adding webcams, especially to portable devices because of the notch. And people make such a big deal about the notch and whether it's too big, and so maybe that's why they've had a bit of a reticence there. Maybe there's been some infighting within Apple about who gets more space at the top of the screen, but it's definitely a nice one to have, particularly because video calls are not going away.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that the 1080p camera at a time was costing them 5 cents more per unit, and therefore it was 720p all the way.
That's your personal thing. I cannot speak to rumors or speculation, Alex.
Or supply chain issues, indeed, because that's what that would be. Um, Moving on, we also saw iOS 16, and they went bold with this one by choosing to highlight the lock screen. Is the ability to customize your lock screen really that exciting, Jen?
Oh, I tell you what, I did see some people on Twitter who were just saying, you know what, I just chose to go lock screen and Android and just look at the hilarity roll in because apparently
yeah.
it's been in Google since Jelly Bean, which was a fair time ago now. But it's nice to see Apple provide some color
Entertainment.
and some interest and some entertainment for the Android folks. Widgets are not only on your home screen now, as they have been on Android for a long time, but they can be on your lock screen as well.
Are they magical widgets?
Probably. I mean, they do change color, which is also
Ooh.
something that I've seen in the Google Pixels, but they
Yeah.
do change color based on the background. So maybe that's magical.
The big thing there, to give Apple a little bit of credit, is that they're opening those up to developers. These aren't just the Apple approved widgets. Developers can widgetize their apps for the lock screen as well, which is, not very Apple step, really.
And I mean, I know we kind of, minimized it because it's a lock screen and it's basically, yeah, a pretty wallpaper that you see on your phone. But there's something really nice about changing the background to your phone and making your device seem a little bit fresh. And this will make it seem a lot more fresh and also potentially make it a bit more useful so that you can glance at things and you don't necessarily have to open your phone up and take a look at things. It's a small thing, but it's useful and you're not going to pay any extra for it.
Yeah, but will you pay for it in terms of battery life? Because that's generally what widgets do on any device.
I mean, there'll be some sort of battery life trade off, but I mean, if you're on a pretty modern phone, I don't think it will take that much battery. In the same way that Samsung has the always on screen, and yes, it eats away at a certain percentage of battery, but it's I can't remember the exact number. It was something like 1 or 2% per day, and it seems like a small price to pay just to be able to glance at your phone.
Bigger problem, I would say, for the iPhone SE 5G owners, because that thing has awful battery life. The newer iPhones that this will run on otherwise tend to have better or, as you say, kind of acceptable single day battery life for sure. So that's probably not going to hit them. One of the other features that got a lot of media attention, I did a bit of radio on this as well, was Apple Messages getting edit and unsend features. Jenny, you excited about things that you've been able to do in WhatsApp forever?
Sure. I mean, I haven't been able to do it on Twitter, so it's nice that Apple beat them to it. Um, I can also do this in Facebook Messenger even. But it's an interesting one, and I think it will be really well used. There have been a lot of embarrassing messages sent in error, possibly while people are drunk, even when they're sober, and autocorrect has just done the wrong thing at the last minute before you press send. It's nice to be able to recall those. I think it's
It's okay,
interesting.
Jen. I kept copies of all those ones.
Okay, good, good. Where you call me Ken.
Yep.
No, there's it's interesting that they decided that on this 15-minute window as well. So you have 15 minutes to reread your stuff and work out that you probably shouldn't have sent that message. I'm going to be interested to see how many people take screenshots of the bad message that come through, and then the good message that kind of replaces it.
I reckon people are also going to trip up on this one pretty badly in the same way that you see people who are on Microsoft Exchange for email tripping up when they think, oh, I can recall that email.
Oh, it's the first thing I read.
Yeah.
Well, both. Yeah, absolutely. Because this is only going to work with iPhones running iOS 16. So if I've got an iOS 16 phone and I call you Ken, but you've pulled out for some reason your iPhone running iOS 15, then you'll still get my message. Doesn't matter what I do to it. If I send it to Adam and he's on Android, he'll still get my message. It's not exactly clear, in fact, whether or not you'll get that exchange style, Alex wishes to delete this message kind of notification or not. But it won't work unless you're in a pure and up to date iPhone world.
But iMessage works across iPads and Macs as well, doesn't it? So do we know if it'll work across those three if
It
they're all running
will.
the latest operating systems?
Yeah, they've said that actually, that it will work across different platforms. Although I assume that they'll have to be regularly updated as well. So they'll have to be updated to the latest iPadOS and what have you.
Yeah.
But if we could get those messages on Android, if we could have a talk to Google about just letting people know that their messages have been attempted to be recalled, I'm going to read those twice as hard.
They also announced a really interesting move for Apple Pay. They did a lot of detail, and we're not going to cover everything. I've got to be clear here, I suppose. But one of the things that they did announce was Apple Pay Later. And this idea that we're going to get into an afterpay style, buy now, pay later kind of thing, splitting up payments. Not coming to Australia yet, but they did say that it was going to come wherever Apple Pay is available. Jen, do you think Apple getting into this market is good for consumers?
Consumers with poor spending habits, probably not. If you want to split your haircut up into 4 easy payments, perhaps. Alex, you should be fine. It's an interesting one. I mean, I know that Apple has a lot of funds in here, and potentially can come into this game and absolutely dominate it. If I was Afterpay or Zip, I'd be so scared about it. In terms of consumers, some people actually really like the buy now, pay later sort of mentality and schemes, and work them out quite well. From what we've seen about it, Apple is promising a very low interest rate, and as I understand it, there's no fees and there's no late payments as well. So from that perspective, maybe it's good for those consumers. From the other perspective of just the sheer opportunity to basically do a buy now, pay later, wherever you can accept like a tap and pay payment from your iPhone, that's going to be tricky. That really widens up the market to splitting your haircuts, the meal you have after your haircut, your groceries, and getting yourself into a bit of a kerfuffle.
Now, Alex, I'm a bit confused about this, and I know you follow this space as well, so you might know. But I thought the whole point with buy now, pay later is that they couldn't charge you interest because then that was like a credit card thing. The whole point was they made their money from fees and late charges. So how can it work like this?
It's a really good question, and I suppose I will say I don't know the full detail. I suppose it depends on how Apple leverages this, given that the Apple Pay ecosystem doesn't charge consumers anything either. It takes a cut from a bank.
I
So,
I may have misspoken when I said interest charges as well. I believe they said no fees and also no late fees. And the other ones, I believe that they charge no fees to consumers, but they do charge a late fee for late payments.
Yeah.
It's not clear what will happen if consumers, for example, don't make a payment. I'm not exactly sure how Apple will deal with that. I mean, there's been some suggestion that they might just cut you off from using Apple Pay until you pay, what you owe.
Excuse
It'll
me,
be
I'll have to
interesting.
buy a Lamborghini.
But I
And
guess
then
they can
not pay
rely
for it.
on that
Or
because
easy
they know
payments.
that iPhone or people in the Apple universe need to spend money through Apple Pay and Apple ID. So they're not going to go into debt and say, oh, I'm not paying that debt back because they still want to buy
Mm.
apps and other things. So maybe there will be no fees because they know that they don't have to charge any money on it because the benefit they get is locking you even tighter into that ecosystem.
Apple rarely does much that doesn't make them money directly, though. I
Yeah.
guess the other big challenge locally, though, and I was going to ask you, Adam, do you reckon that they're just going to get ACCC smashed anyway? Because there's a bit of a monopoly potential here. The thing that Jen was getting at with your afterpays and zips and so on, being scared of them. Because for a lot of people, if the choice is between, well, I've got Apple Wallet, it's already here, it comes up if I, double click the button on the side of my phone versus, well, I've got to launch the app and wait for it to authorize and things go back and forth. People are going to flock to easy because they always do, but that might give Apple an unfair monopoly advantage.
I don't necessarily think so. But cards on the table, I've never used one of these buy now, pay later services, and I never want to use one. And I think they're kind of evil, but I think a whole lot of things are kind of evil, but that's beside the point. A lot of this buy now, pay later stuff now is built into the checkout, built into the buying process from
Mm.
an online store. And I see it all the time when I buy things online. So even if you are shopping on an Apple device and you are shopping at a certain store and you get to the checkout, if that store offers Afterpay or Zip or whatever, it will still be the option will still be there to use that at the checkout. Or you can choose to pay with Apple Pay and then as part of that choose to do buy now, pay later. So I don't think that the way Apple would implement this would deny shoppers the opportunity to use any other buy now, pay later services that merchant chose to offer. So I think Apple could make a fair argument that it's not anti-competitive.
It does have an advantage though, because if there's Apple is saying that Apple Pay Later is available everywhere, whether the merchant signs up to it or not, then they do have an advantage over the others.
Mm.
Now, it's not necessarily anti-competitive, but it does give them kind of a heads up that, an Afterpay doesn't, for example, because they rely on, as I understand it, merchants actually signing up and paying to offer that service. And for some retailers, it's a large part of their business. So they absolutely do that. But for others, they choose not to. And in those, people could come in and use Apple Pay Later whenever they wanted to.
But the thing is, and this is where it could get really, really messy, because those buy now, pay later, and we're getting a little bit off the Apple track in a way, but those buy now, pay later play in a certain financial regulatory space. Apple
Or
Pay
lack
typically,
thereof.
yes, absolutely. Apple Pay currently sits in the credit card space, which is regulated in a slightly different way. This is sort of going to straddle the two.
Hmm.
And I would imagine they've probably done all the legal work in the US where they are launching it first. Here, with our different regulatory structure, it may take some time to appear, and of course, it could appear in a very different form. It might be Apple Pay Later, brought to you by Apple Ireland Pty Ltd, operating out of the Cayman Islands, as opposed to, I'm guessing, as opposed to the Apple Australia that we deal with for other things, or that kind of temporary tax dodge kind of thing. Not that I'm accusing them of anything if Apple's lawyers are listening. But moving right along, we're also getting, and I'm sure that Jen, you and Adam, you will be excited by a 3D map of Sydney.
Yay.
Absolutely. Couldn't yeah. So you can find your way to the airport to get back home.
I love that Apple is continuing to innovate with maps just in case anybody decides to use it one day.
Yep.
Um, they had such a terrible start with it. And you know what? I actually got lost in, I think it was New York one time, and I used Apple Maps, and it was great for pedestrian directions. And I'm sure that 3D maps will be very useful as well. And it's just a case of actually encouraging people to go and check it out now because Google Maps is darn good.
It is. Apple will presumably also be able to leverage this. And I did think this was kind of cool, although they sort of showed it off more in concept with some of the new ways they're going to use CarPlay and new, basically EV style cars with those huge wraparound dash screens. They're putting a lot of effort into that. And I can see the 3D maps working really nicely there.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, the car space, because that's another way that you lock people into the ecosystem. Because if you've got, Apple CarPlay and it works really well for you in your car, then the next phone you're going to buy is an Apple one. If it's working well, people tend to hold on to their cars longer than they do their phones. And so it's absolutely in their interest. And that's why we've seen so many companies really push the car thing, and Apple most of all, I think.
Moving on, because they did cover a lot. WatchOS. Jen, I know you're a lady who loves a watch, loves to buy a watch. Uh, would the prospect of 4 new watch faces on watchOS entice you into an Apple Watch?
I think it's one of those things that's a nice to have. And again, you're not paying any extra for it as long as you don't have an Apple Watch 3,
Mm.
which I do. It was the one that the Apple Watch 3 was really the breakthrough device, and apparently
Mm.
it's not going to be supported by the new watch faces or the new watch OS, which is a bit sad. The new watch faces, I've got to say, they do look nice, and some of them look like traditional watches. And it's interesting that Apple's going for that when they've got a square screen on the front of them. But the thing I was most interested in was sort of the upgrades to sleep, because that's been a bit iffy on Apple Watches, whereas other ones have gone ahead, just, I imagine, because of battery life issues.
I've heard of this sleep thing. I don't seem to get much of it. Tell me about sleep.
Sleep comes in stages, as I understand it, and the Apple Watch sort of extra software is going to potentially break down those sleep stages for you, which Fitbits have been doing for the longest time, and different companies have had different goes at not just doing that, but also taking your vital stats, to make sure that you are in various sleep stages. Whereas some watches tell me that I'm sleeping while I'm just sitting watching TV on the couch, which is mean, Alex. It's mean.
It depends on how boring the program is.
Well, or how enwrapped I am, I suppose. Yes.
Moving right along, we also got a new version of macOS Ventura. Jesse the Body will be very happy.
Yes.
And we discussed this a bit last week, Adam, whether or not they needed to do that much or if they're putting lipstick on a pig. And the arguable lipstick on a pig, the thing that seems to have split a lot of folks, is Stage Manager, this multitasking view that they're going to bring to not only macOS Ventura, but also iPadOS. Jen, do you want to be stage managed?
I think I want my iPad to be stage managed. I kind of
Mm.
get it, because you can move around, different apps on the screen, move some to the side. Maybe it'll help you keep your focus a little bit if you've got like your main work ahead of you, as opposed to, scrolling Twitter and various other apps around you, grabbing your attention. I'm not really sure if I need that on the Mac. I mean, I'm currently using an iMac, and I've got another screen beside me, and yeah, I can handle my apps for myself quite well. Thank you very much. But definitely on the M1 iPads, I think it's going to be a big difference.
So just trying to visualize what this looks like. I saw a screenshot of it. Tell me if I'm right. Traditionally, like on a Mac, you've got the dock down the bottom. On a Windows, you've got the taskbar down the bottom. This is like an extra Windows manager that runs down, we'll say, the left side of the screen. So you're working in Safari or whatever else, but you can see in this little dock on the side which other tabs are open or which other applications are open, and it's quicker to jump between them than going down to the dock.
Yeah,
Does
it's
that sound
like
right?
it's like that, sort of mixed with what they did with the Marvel movies with Iron Man when Tony Stark's like pulling things around from like a virtual UI. It's that kind of thing, but mouse controlled, which is slightly more clunky. Um, I'm with Jen on this. I think this is a great step for the iPad because it deals with that biggest problem I think they've had with the iPad, with them trying to sell it as a full computer, because it's closer. I don't know that it's going to 100% be there, but it's a lot closer because you're getting resizable windows, you're getting a much easier task switcher, because that's sort of what this basically is.
Mm.
I don't want it on a Mac, but I don't want it for a slightly different reason, because I use a Mac, but I absolutely, and I'm just locked into this as muscle memory. My dock is on the left hand side, which is where this is going to be, and I've seen no indication that I can move it around. I don't think I have to use it, but I have this horrible feeling that when I upgrade to macOS Ventura, it's suddenly going to say, "Oh, you want the dock on the left hand side? Oh, no, 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 you can't do that anymore. We're Apple, we know best."
They did that to me with spaces where you could jump between windows, and you used to have them laid out in a grid. So I would have 4 spaces and I would be using the top left most of the time, but then I knew I could go down or right or across. And then when they updated to the next one, they made you have all your spaces across in a line. You couldn't have a grid anymore, which meant I had to retrain all that muscle memory about jumping between my windows, my spaces, because they weren't physically laid out in the same way anymore.
I think what we've discovered in this podcast is that however Apple changes things, they're going to make someone mad.
Yes.
Like there's a really good example of making two people mad right there. And I quite like I've got a trackpad that I use my iMac with, and I quite like using spaces and being able to flick between them with
Yeah.
multiple finger gestures and what have you. I don't know that Stage Manager is going to make that any better, but absolutely on the iPad, flicking between things, because I know that you can flick between open apps with, using 5 fingers on the screen and moving it across, but it looks kind of naff, and you can only do it sort of in that alignment, in that sort of last one, kind of all lined up in a row. Whereas this one, it might be better.
They're also talking about doing away with passwords, with what they're calling pass keys. Again, Jen, are pass keys going to change your password habits?
I thought we'd already done this. I mean, Apple's been saving passwords for a long period of time, and you can unlock them with your face or your finger, depending on what device you've got. But you know what? Any opportunity to get me out of having to remember some sort of ridiculous 15-digit thing that I thought was hilarious at the time, maybe it's a good thing.
But it's still going to need some kind of master password, because I saw LastPass talking about this as well. Something where they're not getting rid of the master password, but they're getting closer to this idea of a passwordless way of doing things.
The big challenge, as far as I can see, and we're still in the beta stage and things can change and so on, is that it appears to rely on you using Safari, which is fine on an iPhone or an iPad because, let's face it, almost everyone does. Less so on a Mac. Um, you've got to be generally in the Apple bubble, and it is absolutely, to my understanding, it is absolutely tied into iCloud, such that if your iCloud storage were full, for example, you might not be able to add new passkeys for new services.
Ouch.
Yeah. So, and I can also see a lot of corporates not being that happy with it if they've got, that kind of rolling password change strategy every 30 days or 60 days or whatever. That's not going to work quite so well for them as well. Like Jen, I agree with you. I think anything that makes us more secure is not a bad thing inherently, but this feels like a little bit of a land grab from Apple as well, because it's very much this is our thing in our control, not an open standard where people can generate these things in their browser of choice, store them in their cloud service of choice. Something like that could be incredible, but that's not what this is.
That's the C word for Apple. Choice.
I wondered where you were going with that for a moment. I mean, we've heard about the passwordless future for such a long period of time that it's become the passwordless pass, even though it hasn't actually happened.
Will this be the year of the password on the desktop? No, wait, that's Linux.
I'd like it to happen. I'd like it to be cross-platform. We'll see when that actually happens. Maybe it'll take the EU to jump on board and make things right.
One of the neater things they showed off, at least conceptually, was a new feature coming to continuity. So this is if you're in the Apple ecosystem and you've got lots of their gadgets, things work with each other and share with each other. Continuity camera is going to let you use your iPhone as a webcam. So even that 1080p camera we were talking about on the MacBook Air might be a little bit redundant. They might be able to do away with the notch altogether and just say, go and buy an iPhone. It'll be your webcam. Jen, is this exciting or is this just a weird quirk?
I mean, it's going to be exciting for people who remember to use it. It's one of those things. I think continuity occurs to people sometimes and sometimes not. However, I think it could be quite good. Like if you were particularly, you're appearing on like a television show, for example, or you were doing, a presentation in front of a lot of people, then having an iPhone camera is not necessarily a bad thing. And the back iPhone camera at that. So if you have an iPhone 12 and up, I mean, it does some really nice things with video and can potentially, naturally blur the background and make you stand out portrait style. I think it's a good thing. I think they'll need to communicate with people how to set it up and use it so it actually gets used.
That's a good point about the back facing camera is something that you don't have on a notebook, and you think, oh, you don't need it. But if you do have scenarios where it would be handy to be able to show people what you're looking at, when you're on a call, then switching across to your phone would make a lot of sense.
It would. There are some limitations in play. The one thing that disappointed me with this, because it strikes me, this could be great if you're a long-term Apple fan, and there's a lot of those, and you've got an older iPhone kicking around that you're not actually doing too much with, or the battery's a bit naff now. Have that sitting on a clip as your permanent, top of laptop, top of monitor, whatever, continuity camera. The only problem with that is this won't work, as I understand, on anything older than an iPhone 10R.
Oh,
So if
so
you're
that
rocking,
pretty much blows that out of the water there.
so if you're rocking an older iPhone,
Yeah.
sorry, it doesn't do continuity camera, and I don't get why. I know what you're saying, Jen, about like the 12 and up have the nice focus feature and they can do that desk looking thing and stuff like that. I don't mind newer iPhones having better cameras, having better features. That's fine. But surely, like the camera on an iPhone 6, 7, or 8, it's still a camera. And there have been other apps that have kind of hacked this in. This feels artificial and forced to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when they start to decide to, actually cut support in all of these technologies. So like in all of this software, we see it time and time again, people will download it straight up and then blame Apple for ruining their lives. So they do have to kind of cut it off somewhere. I believed it was like iPhone 7 this time. So to sort of cut it off even later to the iPhone 10R seems a little bit on the harsh side. I do understand that. I mean, maybe there are some technical reasons why that has to happen. Even though, yes, the 10R did have a decent camera from what I remember.
Yeah, that is just for continuity camera. That's not for
Yeah.
iOS 16. Just to be clear to listeners, that's just for this feature. To my understanding, that's the min spec you've got to hit. But I mean, I guess it is a big challenge though, not just for kind of embedded webcams, but also for the companies that make actual web cameras, because most of those would not match up. For example, if you've got a 13 Pro, the camera on that thing's pretty extraordinary. It'd be fun to see actually what you could do with it, how good an image you could get for your Zoom meetings.
You could be well fancy. And a lot of people have experimented with this in terms of, hosting trivia and those sorts of things and hosting conferences online. You could certainly do that with an iPhone 13 and nobody would think that, you weren't using a reasonably professional camera.
I still think for your average person, though, it's a lot more messing around to do that than to just get a cheap webcam and plug it in and sit it on top of your monitor.
It depends how much you want to look good, Adam.
But they can't. Oh, you mean look good to video quality? I was going to say they can't
Yes.
see you using it. It's like, look
No.
at me, I'm a wanker who's using a phone as a camera, but that's not what he meant. All right.
The results I'm talking
The
about.
results.
Yes.
The thing is, though, and I think they talked about Belkin doing clips, but let's face it, there will be as soon as this feature is out there will be a ton of clips coming out from a ton of cheap factories. They'll be all over your AliExpresses and eBay and all of those kind of places as well. I could totally see a market saying, right, well, rather than spend, $20 on a cheap webcam or quite a bit more on a good one, spend $5 on a clip, pop your phone up there, and you're away. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's a little bit more portable even.
Yeah, the Logitechs of the world are going to have to pivot into, as you say, the clips for the top of your monitor instead of actually producing the webcams. Although, for a long period of time, I think people have just dealt with whatever was actually attached to or built into their monitor or their laptop. So potentially, we could all look a bit better after this.
I'm envisaging a hack involving a clothes peg and a lot of blue tack. This is
Oh
going to
yeah,
work.
it'll happen.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Jen for joining us.
Thank you.
And Jen, you're a long-time contributor to the show. You know exactly what's coming. The Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. I will ask all 3. You can answer them in any order you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media online? And our current big contentious question, when Hollywood finally wises up and makes Jen Dudley the movie, which Hollywood A-lister is getting cast as Jen and why?
Oh, okay. So you can find me online and Twitter most of the time at Jen Dudley. You can find my work across all the News Corp mastheads, so Daily Telly, Courier Mail, that sort of thing. I think another Jennifer. I think Jen Garner could play me. And like she's got kind of the fighting alias skills, and I think that she can pull off some glasses pretty well. She knows her way around TikTok. I think we'll just swap her last name. It'll be fine.
We also would have accepted the woman who played Buffy.
Sarah Michelle
In
Gellar.
No.
or in the movie.
She,
Yeah,
she could be the stunt double.
Yes, there we go.
Probably more Alison Hannigan because she was more geeky, actually.
Yeah, I could totally see. Actually, I could totally see Alison Hannigan.
Okay,
So
as a
Hollywood-
backup.
Yep, Hollywood, get onto it. And while we wait for Vertical Hold, the movie, to be made, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everyone for dropping by once again and for all your great reviews you've been leaving us. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.